Welcome to today's Institute for Supply Management presentation titled Leaving Reverse Auctions in the Dust, Discovering a New Generation of Sourcing Technologies, sponsored by Zycus. We welcome everyone to today's presentation. It's now my pleasure to introduce your content moderator for today, John Yuva. John is editor of ISM's member publication, Inside Supply Management. John, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Kurt. Today we will hear from Jason Busch. Jason is managing director at Azul Partners. He serves as executive editor of Spend Matters and is frequently cited by both the business and trade press and blogosphere for his analysis and opinion. His current research interests include the intersection of sourcing and commodity management technologies, supplier management, and supply chain risk management. Our seminar today will focus on today's sourcing environment, background and context, beyond the reverse auction, applying new approaches, and results, use cases, and recommendations. Jason, welcome to the program.
It's great to be here, John. Thanks so much. I appreciate the quick intro and what we're going to cover. As John mentioned, we divided the program today into 3 sections, and you'll find they flow in a very linear format. I'm sure a lot of folks want to quickly get into technology and how they can consider reverse auctions as just part of a broader arsenal. But I want to set the stage at the beginning talking about the sourcing environment today and why all of this matters. Why now more than ever are basic approaches to sourcing not sufficient? So we'll spend some time on that. Then we'll double-click on how to apply new types of sourcing approaches today. And then I want to actually make it alive by going through some very specific use cases around advanced sourcing tools and optimization specifically across certain categories and how they can be valuable. Just some very quick background on Spend Matters. We are one of the top procurement sites in the sector from a media standpoint. We're a blog. We are also a research site in business as well. We publish quite a bit on sourcing technologies, including advanced sourcing tools in the past number of years, and we'd strongly encourage you to download the research on our site if you're interested for a lot more detail than what we can go through today in today's presentation on advanced sourcing specifically. There's a lot of content there, and we actually have a lot coming out in the next couple of months on sourcing as well. We also cover supplier management, purchase to pay, and related areas too. Our team is now 12 people, and we actually have 4 sites: Spend Matters UK Europe, Metal Miner, and Healthcare Matters. And we would encourage you to check them out based on your industry and what you're curious to learn. With that, let's go right into the core part of the presentation and the first section. So beyond reverse auctions, the new sourcing premise. We believe that if we look back on this era in 10, 20, or 30 years' time, business historians will really observe how much things changed from not just a technology perspective, but a process one, and how organizations turn to tapping the creativity and expressiveness of their suppliers rather than forcing rigid bid specification for a lot of reasons, which we're going to get into in this presentation. We're going to explore specifically the evolution of sourcing and negotiation techniques, including how and why to apply sourcing optimization and advanced sourcing. Just a personal anecdote here. I spent 5 years, as my bio showed before, at free markets before launching Spend Matters and covering this market as a journalist and analyst. So I'm a guilty party in terms of reverse auctions and foisting them on suppliers. I'm also a proponent of them as well. But as you'll see in our thinking here throughout the presentation, we've moved on to realize how much new approaches and technology have really transformed the procurement marketplace and how reverse auctions should just be part of a broader sourcing portfolio today. So moving on to what we will try and leave you with today, we're going to try and give you the context to understand why reverse auction and basic sourcing tools are no longer enough, at least from a standalone basis in today's climate. We want to get into explaining a basic understanding of the tools which are available today and how to use them. We want to show you the types of results which are possible, really leaving you with a bit of the afterlife, if you will. If you go beyond just the frequently cited use cases for transportation and packaging, which is where a lot of companies have applied advanced sourcing techniques today, but we want to show how you can go far beyond that, even getting into broader supply chain aspects of decision-making around who should make what and what type of inventory decisions should be made as part of procurement as well. We want to be able to show how to apply constraints to award decisions too, and we want to be able to look as well at an educational plan for educating your organization on it too. We want to talk as well about what sourcing tool, actually, excuse me, we had a little technical glitch there, but we're going to go to the first poll question now. I will pass it back to John for that.
Right, thank you, Jason. Our first poll question today asks, what sourcing tools does your organization have access to today? The choices are RFX, RFI, RFP, MS Office, email only, reverse auction, or sourcing optimization. Please give us your feedback today by clicking on the choices that apply.
Thanks so much, John. Our own research into this has shown that the penetration of optimization has grown significantly in recent years, but we'll be surprised to see where that number gets based on the audience participation. But I will remind everybody as we go through the poll results as well that this audience is likely skewed towards those who are already using some type of tool. A lot of folks out there are still operating in an offline or office-only world.
Just a few more moments, and we'll close the poll. Right, Jason, what are your thoughts on the poll results?
Yeah, interesting. Actually, sourcing optimization ranked much higher than I thought. We see 75% of respondents using RFX, RFI, and RFP tools out there today, 43% using auctions, and 24% having used optimization as well, which is really impressive. Usually when we talk to most audiences or lecture on the topic, we see 10% penetration at most. Excited to see here that Office is not the largest component. That came in at 59%. Our RFX, RFP, RFI at 75% is by far the largest, but impressive showing for optimization. Great. With that, we're going to move on to the core part of our presentation in terms of why basic sourcing approaches are no longer sufficient today. As organizations have looked at process-driven enablement around technology, a lot of organizations have gone through the use of auctions as an initial tool. If you look at a 5 or 7-step sourcing process, putting them in the negotiation bucket there as a means of driving to usually price-based outcomes, potentially weighting different attributes, but oftentimes, again, based on having suppliers bid rigid bid specifications. If we look at the kinds of results which are possible today through sourcing, these approaches often fall short, though, and we'll get into why commodity, economic, currency, and other volatility, and the ability to tap the expressiveness of suppliers in terms of their response and then optimize against internal constraints can yield a much better result than forcing suppliers to bid that rigid bid specification. So we would argue that today that sourcing approaches and technologies really must evolve, and we must consider the range of nuances we're going to get into right now. So what's going on today in the world, and why do the macro factors and macroeconomics matter? They're quite important. It's hard not to open up the Wall Street Journal or the Times or CNN or Fox today online or on the cable networks and see why commodity and economic trends are not critical to not only our companies, but the world around us. A lot of attention in the past couple of weeks has been paid specifically to oil price volatility and rising prices, especially of Brent crude. But there are far greater concerns, we would argue, on a macro basis, which should factor in as well. The global economic picture presents lots of uncertainty right now, especially in the EU. However, the EU is not the only picture, and we'll get into looking at GDP trends in a minute and why that matters for sourcing within the EU and other areas. And we would encourage you to actually look at our research on the subject of currency volatility, which is available on our sites as well. But we've got to consider the picture of China, of India, of what's going on in the U.S. Actually, some positive numbers in the U.S. to come out of ISM on both the manufacturing and non-manufacturing side, as well as the growth markets of Central and South America. If you look at economist estimates for U.S. GDP, we're seeing decent growth for 2012 relative to coming out of the last downturn, seeing growth of 2 to 3%. Goldman Sachs, in a recent report from November, has cited household finances improving despite the large foreclosure rate. Fed actions pushing stability by the Fed, the Fed willingness to keep the funds rate low for a number of years, and cyclical sectors having bottomed out. So certainly challenges in the U.S. economy for sure, but growth at the same time. There's been a lot of talk recently around international trade in the U.S. and abroad, and we've seen a lot of large sourcing decisions, which we've been privy to and have researched recently with different folks in the market, where trade comes into play and the location of various suppliers based on the end use of products and services, and the split of business based on the end use of products and services across categories, based on trade, based on the actions of China and other countries around base materials consumption, around rare earth metals, around traceability, around a whole bunch of issues. We do think, though, that certain markets, for example, looking at the agricultural commodities, are going to remain highly volatile throughout 2012, and we'll talk about some of that in a minute and why that matters. There's lots of stories here around emerging market demand, rising raw material costs, small upticks in demand, supply chain disruptions, and the like. If we look at European GDP on slide 11, we see a trend which is trailing down, but it's not likely to last for long at this point in time. In fact, we see a continued downturn. We see 0.2% growth in recent quarters, and those numbers based on output are likely to be revised downwards if you talk to a number of economists. Obviously, we all know the crisis here. If we look at the situation with the currency, and we look at Greece and Spain, Portugal, pulling down the common currency and the challenges, we see the situation, even with a strong exporting economy in Germany not being able to pull the EU out of its challenging economic times. Also weighing on the situation heavily are sanctions with Iran driving up the cost of Brent crude, which European pricing is based off of, versus West Texas Intermediate crude in the U.S. So challenges of energy costs, challenges of reduced demand based on the economy, and obviously broader questions of the European currency, the common currency as well. If we consider the situation with U.S. GDP, with China GDP, we see continued growth amidst underlying concerns. You can look at these numbers and see, wow, 8.9% quarterly growth year over year. Hey, it's not the heyday of what happened in 2008 or 2010, but significant. However, as we'll get to in a minute, there's a lot of questions around China growth and demand. If we look at automobile production, which is a great bellwether, for example, we saw 30% growth in the domestic production of Chinese cars between 2009 and 2010, but we saw a great leveling off and virtually no growth in terms of new vehicle production between 2010 and 2011. So still, the number one market in the case of new car sales and new car production, but a leveling off of growth. If we look at the U.S. picture as well, in the context of the global economy, we see a situation where solid growth has occurred in the past few quarters, not been as great as the stronger rebounds coming out of previous recessions, but still decent nonetheless. As we mentioned before, there's consensus estimates looking ahead at around 2 to 3% growth this year. We'll get into PMI numbers in a minute and why that matters, but in general, a better picture than what we've seen in Europe. China PMI, though, getting back to China for a minute, is another story. And we'll get into a use case decision later on when it comes to global sourcing and optimization as well. The key with China, though, is that unofficial numbers are telling a lesser story. The key here, looking at the situation, is that we have numbers coming out of Beijing. We also have unofficial numbers coming out of banks like HSBC looking at the China situation as well. And we see kind of these numbers looking on the side of PMI, which is unofficial, declining to even negative territory in the early months of 2012, but the government reported numbers of higher. Still, you see the growth rates declining from the 2011 and 2010 numbers. So a mixed picture in terms of demand, consumption, and that will lead to questionable strategies around commodities, around currency, and related areas, as we'll get to later, and how that can factor into sourcing strategies. UMI and US and PMI, though, appears quite strong. We see February numbers on the manufacturing side quite strong overall. January numbers from 2012 of 54.1. We see 56.8, which indicates growth, obviously above 50 for the month compared to the previous year. These numbers are trending upwards and present a solid sign. This will obviously have an impact on sourcing strategies and potential capacity in various markets as well, and we'll tap that later in the presentation as to how we can look at these growth numbers in the context of pricing strategies and sourcing strategies using tools today. If we look at the current commodity mix and the currency and economic mix, it's somewhat of a dangerous cocktail. Why does all this matter? As anybody who's gone through the commodity boom, bust, and boom again in recent years, we've seen tremendous upward price pressure, and in certain cases downward pressure leading to upward pressure again across commodities. We've also seen challenges and challenges of pricing on the currency front as well in terms of local contracts, given the volatility of the euro and the dollar, not to mention other currencies as well in the global market. Lots of questions about the RMB. How does this all add up as we look at contracting strategies and tapping the flexibility of approach which is not as rigid as reverse auctions? We'll get to that in a bit. But I want to share very quickly, looking at this mix of volatility on commodities specifically, just what we're dealing with some examples. Gold, which has got significant industrial applications outside of its precious metals standpoint. We see a 53% increase between January 2010 and February 2012. As we joke here, Mr. T thanks you for his healthy return. Rhodium, which is more volatile, arguably, than the metal in my wife's ring, even though I think it was an alloying element in there, but has lots of industrial applications. Just to look at this volatility over a multi-year period, from 10,000 an ounce to 2,000 to 3,000 to 1,500, very significant. If we look at crude oil, huge volatility. These numbers are from a week and a half ago when we finalized the slides for the presentation, but a 48% increase between January 2010 and February 2012. If we were to use today's numbers, it would be above 50%, given all the uncertainty right now in the Middle East, the sanctions against Iran. Even if we consider reduced demand in certain parts of the world, slowing economy, or slowing growth rates, should we say, in China, slowing growth in Europe, we still see tremendous upward price pressure. Corn, which has got many roles in just a tremendous range of products, even outside of the pure food and CPG space. If we look at chemicals, if we look at ethanol, huge crop in terms of impact of use across the board. 42% increase between January 2010 and February 2012, and you can bet derivative products have increased in a similar light as well. As we wind down our quick tour of commodities, and palladium, which is in the same family as platinum, we see a 65% increase. We joke here, most folks don't even know what it's used for. It's got a role in catalytic converters. It's used in jewelry now as well, but significant increase. If we talk about the platinum metals specifically, there's tremendous supply risk owing to the source of supply. We see South Africa with platinum specifically controlling 80% of the market of production, and questions of labor and other challenges as well. So if we look across these markets, we see a lot of issues. Just to sum up, and how these can factor into our sourcing strategies, which we'll get to in a moment. We see the total cost and labor costs on the rise in various markets for raw materials. We see trade and export policy changes. There was a recent ruling against China, which will impact the cost of certain metals, as the case may go. Shipping charges can have great volatility, and even though today's presentation is not around cost modeling, certainly cost breakdowns as an element of sourcing are very important if we consider surcharges, bunker charges, and the like. Currency volatility obviously is a very big deal in the market today as our production capacity constraints. We've also seen a kind of a raft of new regulations, the implementation of Dodd-Frank, which is ongoing right now, and how that will impact traceability. And then obviously black swan events impacting supply markets as well, the unfortunate incidents in the Thailand flooding and the Japanese tsunami and earthquake causing supply to come offline. I like to tell the story here of going to Costco recently and seeing a sign for a new Sony camera that I could not purchase because the hard drive was not available for it. So Costco even telling consumers because of supply disruptions, the product is not available. So how does this all add up? If we look at a sourcing view above the clouds, we've got to begin to shift our approach in terms of how we buy and how we negotiate. If we look at today across the board, especially looking at parts, components, finished materials on the direct side, 20 to 80% of the cost of typical parts and components remain outside of our suppliers' control. We've got to think about ways beyond just the supplier margin of getting costs under control and creating a band and an acceptable level of risk we can tolerate around volatility. We've got to think about critical areas to target. And we've got to get more collaborative in how we engage our suppliers across information exchange in the sourcing process. I really like this term, sourcing information asymmetry. We, I believe, coined this last year, and it really represents a change in thinking. And the great news about the tools we'll be introducing in a moment is that we can take advantage of information asymmetry, which kind of runs counter to traditional sourcing approaches. Until recently, transparency was really the big and often the only thing that procurement organizations cared about when they were after specific outcomes, right? If we look about the rise of the auction, it was all about creating a process where there was complete information disclosure. If we got the bid package correct, every supplier knew exactly what they were bidding. It was supplier versus supplier. It was apples to apples. The challenge here is that in an environment where we see such great change in underlying volatility of commodities, of currencies, of demand, we might want to exploit a situation where we have more information than our suppliers, and we might not be keen to share everything. We might be keen, for example, to understand the price premium a supplier might give us to hold pricing firm for a quoted period of 6 months versus 3 months versus next month for our underlying raw materials. What are they charging for that? If we calculate that they're undercharging the market in terms of the materials, there's a lot more opportunity potentially to take advantage of that situation than necessarily going to a third-party hedge as an example. So we've got to really change the sourcing mindset today for today's commodity and economic markets. The key, we would argue, is putting information discovery first. We've got to think about collecting as many points of data as possible. We want to figure out, in certain cases, for example, whether or not we should be making an item, or whether or not our suppliers should, or whether or not our suppliers should be providing on the Tier 2 level base materials, or should they be kitting them for our Tier 1 suppliers, as an example. We've got to think about discovering these different price points and really questioning the notion of a hard and fast RFP. In lots of cases, this comes down to evaluating more options and more suppliers versus less. And we've got to think about negotiations around becoming outcomes and access to information, and really think of them as how they can drive us down a certain path of information discovery versus just being a finite outcome at the end. We also need to think about the cost of taking risk off the table as well. What premium are we willing to pay for that? And the cost in many cases is not just the cost of a hedge as an option, if you will, but we need to think about the balance sheet implications because of the accounting aspects of our decisions as well, and needing to mark potential hedges and other vehicles we might use on a monthly or quarterly reporting basis, even if it's 12, 18, or 24 months out.
Jason, what are the prerequisites for developing a collaborative culture for information gathering?
You know, it really requires changing the mindset within a procurement organization. And I think the first step, which is so critical, is thinking about procurement as a service provider to the business. So if you are a category lead for metals, if you're a category lead for plastics or energy, serving your constituents and understanding that, yes, continuity of supply matters, yes, purchase price variance matters, but what are they really concerned about? If they're concerned about large orders coming down the pike, and can we quote and respond and hold our pricing firm, what does that require on the procurement side? For example, we might figure out that we've worked with 3 suppliers in the past, but we've done 80-10-10 split of business. If we know working with our stakeholders that we need to engineer an additional capacity, we might be willing to pay a premium to those second and third suppliers and potentially give them more business just to lock in the capacity. So thinking about how do we engage stakeholders is such a key part of collaboration. And then engaging suppliers more creatively is often an outgrowth of that. Procurement, in many cases, I like to say, should not be about saying no, right? Historically, a lot of what procurement and sourcing folks have done is to say no. It's about asking questions. It's not necessarily saying yes, but it's about asking the right questions and working with the business. So that brings us to our next poll question.
Well, thanks, Jason. Our second poll question asks, what sourcing tools does your organization use most frequently today? Your choices are MS Office, email only, RFX, RFI, RFP, reverse auction, or sourcing optimization. And again, please give us your feedback today on the poll question. And for this question, please choose the one choice that most applies.
Yeah, so very similar to our first question. However, we're interested in what is used most frequently today, which is kind of the telltale sign of where companies are in general adoption. As we look at the numbers coming in, what I would caution today, again, as we share the sample, is that the general audience here is a bit more sophisticated than the typical procurement audience we might survey. Again, everybody here is tuning in from the standpoint of wanting to learn more around advanced technology, rather than just the basics. So as we look at the numbers as they've come in, we see a preponderance of RFX, RFI, RFP as the most common form of sourcing tool today, at 62%. What's shocking is reverse auctions, 3% usage today as a common tool. Sourcing optimization comes in at 4%, and MS Office and email only comes in at 30%. So the good news is we see very decent adoption of tools and systematic processes. What's very surprising to me is how auctions, I believe, have dropped relative to where they would have been a couple of years ago, based on the sophistication of this crowd. Great. So let's add it up. Why does volatility and uncertainty matter today in shifting sourcing mindsets? Number one, we've really got to consider a wide range of considerations today in the market more broadly. You've got to think about risk management and containing risk. We've got to think about moving beyond locking suppliers into rigid specifications, because we might find that if they can provide alternatives to us, we can engineer out cost before we lock it in, which in many cases, going through a traditional RFP, RFI process is what happens. So let's talk about now specifically, how do we get beyond the reverse auction and apply new approaches? If we think about changing the sourcing paradigm on slide 27, it's really about moving from a mindset of lowest total cost to a mindset of looking at lowest total cost. I'm just going to shift slides here. We've got to think about moving beyond fixed specifications to fixed and flexible specifications. We've got to think about rigidity in process and how we've moved away from this into an area of resilience in process, right? We're not going to have fixed specifications as much as resilient ones. As we always like to say in the sourcing world, historically it was about apples to apples, right? But now we're as interested in, quote me, an apple and a pear. We want to see the different options and how you price them out as a supplier. Today, we're as much about exploring and quantifying scenarios as we are around cut and dry award decisions. Let's try and understand the possibilities rather than assuming how we've lotted, for example, an event is the only way to go. I really like to say historically, the sourcing approach was about the Cold War. It was about us versus them, buyers versus suppliers. We could lock in specifications and go from there. But today we're living in what I'll call the post-Soviet Union world. It's complicated, right? If we think about foreign policy today, it's infinitely more complicated than it was 20 years ago. The same is true of sourcing. We like to think as procurement professionals, historically, approaches were about negotiation and poker, right? I'm a good negotiator. I've thought this through. I've got a good poker face. Now it's more about game theory and discovery, and we'll get into why in terms of these tools today now. So what does advanced sourcing optimization enable? At the most basic, it enables a much more fluid RFI, RFP collection process, right? So we're collecting not just fixed specifications, but potentially alternative specifications as well. It lets us fully explore versus just weight price and non-price factors in a tender. So we're not going to apply rigid weights necessarily, but we're going to consider constraints as well. We'll get into what all these terms mean in a minute if you're new to the topic, so don't be worried. We'll provide some real examples as well. It also provides us with an ability to run scenarios based on constraints and present a menu of outcomes for stakeholders to consider. In fact, one of the best capabilities of advanced sourcing and optimization tools today is that they create an audit trail of options. We can show stakeholders in the business the cost of splitting business between certain suppliers. What is the premium the business is willing to pay to ensure we have multiple suppliers across different geographies? What is the premium the business is willing to pay to lock in pricing on the commodity level for 12 months versus a single quarter? So why does this all matter here? Certainly the ability to explore different commodity scenarios, right? Who buys from whom, how much, when, on what level. It allows us to discover unforeseen potential advantages or disadvantages of specific suppliers based on how they respond, and really to understand the trade-offs of cost, and overall to become much more collaborative as well. Now, distilled to its essence, what does advanced sourcing optimization enable? It's really about the collection of a virtually unlimited supply of data points from suppliers, including gathering bids and offers in multiple ways. So these might be suggested bids, right? We want you to bid these specifications, but also bid alternatives. We might want you to bid these suggested lots, but also show us different groupings. Show us where the breaks are from a volume standpoint. Then the next stage of this, obviously, is looking at what's come back to us, whether we've done it in a single round or multi-round basis, or whether we've given suppliers real-time feedback to adjust their bids like an auction in a sourcing optimization environment. And then at that point, we can begin to run our constraints against the supplier responses. Now, this is very different than weighting from a traditional ERFX perspective, which we'll get to now. So how do we get creative with data and with data collection? We've got to think about different types of fields, different types of responses a supplier might submit to us, right? So we've got to think about alternative bids. Let's allow suppliers to offer different types of bids based on items, based on quantities, based on bundles. We've got to let suppliers tie together different types of bid packages. We want to begin to explore supplier capacities, right? What is your absolute capacity? We might discover, based on how a supplier bids, that they don't want to give us all of their capacity for one reason or another. Maybe they have more profitable customers who take a smaller piece of their capacity, and they can only go to a certain point. We want to begin to explore contract terms in certain cases. We've seen optimization applied to different types of expectations on the contract level around indemnification and other areas, right? What is the cost of indemnification? What is that price premium versus not? It can be much more significant than you might think. We've got to think about locations and logistics. We've got to think about volume discounts and regional cost structures as well. So really, it's about getting creative with how we collect this information from suppliers. It's not just about collecting a single unit price. It's about looking at different alternatives and really being able to collect all this information and then score it in a manner which creates structure ourselves. So whereas the supplier might submit many different options to us, we can then evaluate that in the context of broader bids from multiple suppliers and broader offers. So this is where the application of constraints come in after a bid. So with optimizations, organizations can create very specific constraints and run different scenarios to understand the potential outcome. Now, the key thing to remember around constraints is that they add cost. They don't subtract cost. So for example, we might have a constraint around awards taking into account CSR data. We might want to make sure in the case of refrigeration, if we're a retailer, if we're putting in a new system, that we want to make sure it meets certain environmental specifications in terms of energy usage. And whereas that might cost us more up front, we need to figure out, at bare minimum, as one constraint we might apply in certain geographies, awarding a certain percentage of business to suppliers who bid specifications which meet those energy level requirements. A constraint might be around split of business, right? We want to award no more than a certain level of business onto certain suppliers. Or we might say in the case of supplier diversity that we need to award at least 20% of business to diverse suppliers. Yet, based on big collection, we might have in that case our Tier 1 suppliers taking the opportunity to work with lower tier suppliers on our behalf as part of their bids to make sure that diversity content is included indirectly versus directly on the Tier 1 level. We're now going to get to polling question number 3, and I'll pass it back to John.
Thanks, Jason. Our third poll question asks, what percentage of spend potential that your organization addresses in a strategic sourcing manner is appropriate for advanced sourcing optimization approaches? Your choices are 0 to 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 50%, or 50% or more.
In looking at this question, one thing we've often seen is as companies begin to use optimization, they realize that it's applicable for a bit more than what they thought up front. And once companies start using it, you don't see a lot go back to different types of negotiation approaches across those categories for which it is implemented.
And Jason, what are some of the characteristics that would indicate an organizational motivation and maturity to adopt advanced e-sourcing approaches?
Certainly companies who've used auctions in the past, and they've had challenges implementing savings, and that's become a known situation inside the organization that they've identified 20% savings in a category, but when they go back and measure, only 5% has been implemented. And they want to begin to do something about it. When they've had situations where there's significant concern over supply risk, and they want to ensure that they have different options. When there's concern over commodity volatility, and the company might have a no-hedge strategy, but they want to understand the price premium a supplier might charge to lock pricing for a certain period of time. So they can't hedge on the market per se, but they might pay a premium to suppliers based on the willingness to hold pricing firm for a period of time. So usually companies who've been burned in one way or the other and have the experience to know that historic approaches haven't worked are those who are best suited to take full advantage of advanced sourcing approaches.
All right, great. What are your thoughts on the polling results? It looks like pretty even among choices 2 and 3.
Yeah, so very positive numbers here. So we see at 0 to 10%, 13% of respondents suggesting that 0 to 10% of their spend is appropriate for advanced sourcing approaches. We see 34% of respondents suggesting that 10 to 25% is appropriate. 33% are suggesting between 25 and 50% of their spend is appropriate, and 18% over 50%. So some pretty high numbers there in terms of shifting the paradigm. So let's understand, where does optimization fit into the suite mindset? It's our view today that optimization has ceased to be a feature alone of broader sourcing suites. You can use it standalone, you can use it alongside traditional sourcing approaches, but in many cases it's driving the decision to buy sourcing tools today. It's not just a single feature. And in lots of ways, it's changing how we envision engaging suppliers, how we do negotiation. It's not just a tool, it opens up possibilities. And it opens up a new philosophy and mindset, and I think that's what's really key. And hopefully with a few case examples in a minute, we'll bring that alive. I think what's so key to remember here as well is that with training, even mid-level procurement team members can quickly learn how to take advantage of optimization. At first, it's not just training and tools. It does require a change in mindset. It does require teaching folks in certain cases to build formulas if they want to get into situations looking at different award scenarios. It does require thinking a bit outside of the box in terms of getting past rigid specifications. But even with basic training, you can go far fast. So putting on a category hat, where can I apply it? We think sourcing optimization is applicable across a very wide variety of categories. Certainly past just transportation, is often used in LTL and full truckload, ocean, air, and small parcel in the past. It's now applicable across a range of indirect, direct, and services categories. We've seen optimization and advanced sourcing approaches used across raw and base materials. We've seen it used across semi-finished products and finished products. We've seen it used in electronics. Certainly on the indirect side, we've seen it used across packaging and telecom. We've seen it used across a whole number of areas. I want to get now into the results and use cases which are possible. I know we're going through a lot of material fairly quickly here, and we're going to try and get to as many questions as possible at the end as well, but don't feel like you have to take notes and furiously scribble. These slides will also be made available as well after the webinar. So changing the sourcing mindset. We've talked quite a bit about this already, but how do we truly bring this alive? We think that optimization can enable sourcing teams to create an environment founded on this supplier expressiveness. And really it's a means of deconstructing a supply market and understanding which parties at different tiers are best at providing different elements. Certainly thinking through how do we apply formulas and how do we think through scenarios is key. But oftentimes we see the whole point here around applying these broader scenarios and potential contingencies in the organization in terms of what matters to risk management, in terms of what matters to specific business owners. That it's no longer just about cost, but show us what the added cost is to take risk off the table and help us quantify it. Tools to actually track and implement results as well are important after the fact. So we don't just claim savings, but we implement it as well. And the good news about these tools is that they can enable us to do it. So let's go through a couple different use cases as well as to how these tools can be applied. Resin is a perfect example. So if we think about the resin that goes into a plastic bottle, we can use optimization and advanced sourcing tools to understand different supplier responses. So let's say we break out the resin content in the bid equation. So we ask suppliers for different percentages in terms of resin content, and then we collect that information from suppliers. Using optimization, we can begin to look at commodity price sensitivity and adjust supplier allocations based on resin content. Now, suppliers might not be willing to lock prices, and as we all know with the volatile oil markets, resin markets are volatile as well, but if we look at percentage used, we can begin to understand as markets move, where supplier pricing moves, and we can make decisions based on that decision around supplier responses, not just on the initial unit cost or total cost, but based on where the markets might move as well. Creates a whole level of transparency with suppliers. With that, we're going to move to the next poll question, John.
Right, thank you, Jason. Our final poll question asks, considering your own spend mix, category profiles, and likely adoption levels by the year 2015, are you most likely to apply optimization approaches rarely, selectively across complex categories such as transportation, more broadly across complex categories, across a broader percentage of my spend that is currently auctioned or goes through strategic sourcing processes today, or as a rule and not the exception for categories that require a strategic sourcing approach?
So we're interested here in a forward-looking perspective, right? Put yourself in the shoes of running a strategic sourcing function in 2015, and how likely you are to use these approaches at that point. Just finalizing the responses which are coming in now. Okay. Last chance.
Any surprises with the popularity of selectively across complex and specialized categories?
You know, it's not surprising because that's where it's applied today. in terms of spend mix, most likely. So 38% of respondents said selectively. Only 10% said rarely. 23% more broadly. We asked the question a different way as well in terms of response, and 16% said across a broader percentage of my spend that is currently auctioned or goes through sourcing. And 10%, this is the response we were curious to see here, will use optimization and advanced sourcing as the rule and not the exception for categories that require a sourcing approach. So we still see dominant using it selectively, but certainly some organizations are going to use it quite broadly. Okay, so let's get through a few more use cases here. Let's go through a metals use case. We cover metals extensively on our site Metal Miner, and we've walked through a lot of case examples in the past around different sourcing approaches. So let's say in this case a category lead for metals, it might be for pipe or tube, might opt to explore different commodity scenarios using optimization. They might want to look at who is buying from whom. Is that tier 1 supplier buying from the same facility as another tier 1 supplier on that we work with? And who should actually undo the buying? Should it be us in terms of demand aggregation programs? And on what terms? In this case, the sourcing lead might discover unforeseen potential advantages or disadvantages of certain suppliers. So it might be access in certain cases to mill direct pricing that we didn't know existed before. It might be working with suppliers who've got inventory and they're willing to hold pricing firm to burn it off for a period of time. The point here is that optimization tools enable us to collect all these different elements and really begin to understand the cost of commodity trade-offs in different decisions. So, what does it cost not to award 100% of spend to a given supplier? This type of thinking can really reduce the chance of disruptions in certain markets. We've seen some really fascinating strategies applied to metals in China and Korea and Japan, for example, where we've seen companies with previous supply concentration in Japan, for example, look to move concentration out of Japan, not because of quality, but because of geographic risk. Obviously, the situation last year showed us the risk of natural disasters there, to splitting business with Korea and Chinese suppliers as well for service in that market. But what is the cost of that move? Being able to quantify that and show it so we can make a business case for it is a huge value of optimization. Another quick use case is around temporary labor. We've seen organizations here, one case, want to take advantage of downward price pressure on wage rates. Using optimization, they collected significant data from suppliers. In this case, this particular project involved over 200 stakeholders. And the organization gathered information at the location level, looking globally by job type, across skill categories, across pay rates, looking at social costs and management fees paid to third parties. In each of these offers, suppliers bid individual rates by location, and then also potentially other rates as well based on the particular grouping of items. And in the end, the company was able to make an award decision, which not only saved significant sums. In this case, I believe it was looking at potentially 8 figures of savings over a multi-year period, but they were able to understand from internal decision makers their particular business needs and requirements and factor them into the case to get a better outcome from that decision. And in doing so, they also consolidated the supply base by 50% as well. So beyond sourcing alone, I mentioned before the ability to begin to introduce supply chain factors into the occasion as well, into the situation as well. So for example, looking at a CPG company who leveraged optimization to gather data across a number of data points to understand capacity planning and forecasting as well, in collecting information regarding pricing and cost breakdowns on the product, transportation, duties, and related areas. They also looked at the cost of qualifying suppliers for different lines as part of the process, looking at volume breaks as well. And the ultimate solution required factoring in all this complexity. So it was sourcing, but it was also supply chain at the same time. And using an optimization approach, they were able to work as a team, not just on a periodic basis in an S&OP manner, but to design an optimal supply chain and an optimal cost structure from the start. So when does optimization fit? Just want to quickly share some data here. One study, which we've referenced before, showed that 22% of events where optimization was only used for 100 to 999 line items, so relatively small events. In other events, we've seen, in this case, 21%, where there were between 1,000 and 10,000 line items. And in certain cases, which is where optimization has historically been used in the past, you see tens of thousands or potentially hundreds of thousands of line items. But increasingly, it's being used for smaller and smaller events. If we also look as well in terms of where it fits, in terms of the types of constraints companies are applying in this sample case, 77% of bids in this one sample included capacity or volume-based constraints for companies applying these post-bid to understand market dynamics. 34% included conditional offers. 16% included bundled bids or packaged bids. I won't get into all the specifics across different categories here, but needless to say, folks are using it differently based on the categories themselves. So quickly, educating your audience, the basics. What's critical here is to show what's possible with new advanced sourcing and optimization approaches. We've gone through some scenarios to show the power of what optimization can bring, but it's important to, again, show the afterlife with your organization around what is possible. We think part of this, a key aspect of it, is bringing alive the overall sourcing, economic, commodities, and currency climate. Sourcing decisions are more complex, and our technology has got to reflect that. We think that it's critical to make sure your technology can support the business needs here as well, and educating the audience in that capacity. Training here is absolutely key, not just on using technology, but on the mindset and the process involved in getting the most from optimization as well. So a number of concluding recommendations. First, we want to leave you with how the importance of the current climate calls for a new sourcing mindset, not just a type of new technology to apply. If we think about advanced sourcing just in terms of technology, we fail. The technology is extremely powerful. This is not stuff we can do using older sourcing tools or Excel or Access. Hugely powerful, but we've got to think about a mindset first. We've got to think about exploring different alternatives with multiple tiers of suppliers. So not just looking at options with tier ones, but let's investigate multiple potential tiers. Who should supply what? Who should make what? Where should assembly occur? Where should inventory be held? With optimization, we can evaluate all of these decisions. We also think, as our third recommendation, you should consider optimization and advanced sourcing at the core of any e-sourcing decision today. Number 4, don't let current tool limitations from solution providers limit progress. Identify the right technologies and get to work. So if you're using technology from a certain provider and it doesn't support what you need, supplement it or replace what you have. Absolutely key to make sure that technology does not limit you. And then last, the importance of educating and evangelizing and changing the mindset inside companies is so key. So think about what you can do to truly be a change agent around what is possible. So I want to leave you with here as well. Spend Matters and Metal Miner, our sister site, are hosting an event coming up on March 19th and 20th, where we'll be showcasing different advanced sourcing approaches, including optimization, and we'll be providing commodity outlooks across a whole range of commodities and the broader economy across metals, plastics, packaging, ingredients, you name it. So if this stuff is interesting to you and you're concerned about commodity volatility, it might be a good fit for your organization. You can learn more on our sites, and there's an ISM discount and credit hours awarded as well. So leave you with my contact information here. As I said, there's an awful lot of information available on our sites in terms of research we published on the subject. Realize we had a lot of material to get through, but look forward to your questions, and we will also try and provide more information in our research this year, so would encourage you to check back as we publish more and more on the topic.
Right, thank you very much, Jason. Before we get into our Q&A section, I'd like to announce that the slides of today's presentation are now available for download in the Documents tab on the bottom right of your screen. So click on the Documents tab, and you'll be able to download our slides from today's event. At this time, we are ready to address your questions. To send in a question, click New Question in the Q&A panel on the lower section of your screen. Type your question or comment in the space at the bottom of the panel and click Send. To send additional questions, click New Question for each new submission. Questions will be addressed verbally as time allows, and your submitted questions are visible only to the presenters. Let's start with a question that came in during the presentation. Let's see here. This one, Jason, is from Jeffrey. Is there any data that shows that there is a transfer from reverse auctions to the next generation of sourcing technologies?
You know, we've looked at some data provided by providers in terms of how their organizations are using different tools when all are made available today. And what we see is when that training occurs and that education occurs, that there is a migration from both RFX approaches and RFI approaches, you know, either sealed or multi-round bidding, and reverse auctions to optimization in select categories. More advanced companies are deploying advanced sourcing across multiple categories today, and we see a strong transition from auctions. And I go back to that number at the start of the presentation. 3% of respondents use auctions predominantly today. A couple years ago, with a more advanced crowd, that might have been 10%, it might have been more. So we definitely see some progress here, but we think a lot of the progress is going to take place in the next couple of years.
All right, terrific. Our next question is from Pamela, who asks, we are a financial institution and would like some solid examples of where reverse auctions are being utilized.
Well, topic today is primarily around getting past auctions alone, but in terms of financial services institutions, certainly across a lot of larger indirect categories. So, you know, looking at servers, looking at other types of IT hardware and equipment are places where both reverse auctions and optimizations can be applied. We've seen other types of sourcing events include relocation services. We've seen facilities services. You know, we've seen lots of different areas for these organizations, often core spend because you know, they're not producing a product, rather it's virtual goods, but there's still significant spend, and either reverse auctions or advanced sourcing approaches can be used.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Kathy, who asks, reverse auctions focus on total cost. How does an organization maximize implementation of optimization on non-repetitive purchase materials or goods?
So if you could repeat the question, but I think it was on non-repetitive purchases or goods, so contract-based, correct?
Yeah.
I guess is the way. Well, here what really I would suggest, and obviously in lots of cases in direct materials, we're going to set a contract price for a period of time, but that time might vary. So let's say, you know, we're looking at bidding out a printed circuit board or bidding out a fastener or stamp part. It might not be non-repetitive, so you know, we might be looking at bidding it out over a 3-year contract, but we might want to investigate the options, for example, of locking or not locking the underlying commodity price for that period of time, floating the index price, for example, based on the underlying index, looking at the cost of a possible hedge as part of that contract length as well. So there's a strong applicability of advanced sourcing to these cases in terms of exploring different options over contract length and terms, and even exploring different contract terms and length as well.
Right, thank you. And thank you to our attendees today for your questions. Attendees of today's event will receive an email from ISM within 10 business days with links to your Continuing Education Hours certificate and the archived interactive recording of today's event. For these secure links to work, you must be logged into ISM's website at www.ism.ws. Please use the username and password that you normally use on the ISM site and that you used to sign up for today's event. If you can't recall what that is, select the My Account link at the top right, then select Recover My Password. If you haven't yet set up a username and password, you can create a new one here. Or if you don't have or know your ISM ID number, you'll need to contact ISM Customer Service at 800-888-6276, option 8. The login link is accessible through ISM's homepage at www.ism.ws at the top right-hand side of the page under Login. After you are logged in, the link sent in the ISM post-event email will work and you will be able to retrieve your documents. Save your ism.ws username and password for future events and to interact on ISM's website. Turn it back over to you, Kurt.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our presenters. That does conclude our presentation, Leaving Reverse Auctions in the Dust, Discovering a Next Generation of Sourcing Technologies, brought to you by the Institute for Supply Management and Zycus. Thank you to our presenter, Jason Busch and moderator John Yuva. We do hope you enjoyed the presentation. As a reminder, we ask you to stay on the line just for a moment and complete the evaluation that will appear momentarily on your screen. Your comments and suggestions are always important as it helps us provide you with future quality programming. Today's program is copyrighted in 2012 by the Institute for Supply Management, all rights reserved. And you may close your Omnovia session once you have completed the evaluation. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the rest of your day.